And today with me, I have Hillard, which is from Microsoft Digital. He's a principal software engineer, and he'll talk about himself later on. We'll talk about how the solution is used within Microsoft. And Andrew Lomakin, product expert, leader product expert, that will show you a demo of the product and what it can do. So looking at our agenda for today, it's pretty packed. We're going to start a little bit with Microsoft Sentinel. I will also give a short overview of what Microsoft Sentinel is for those who join us for the first time, or for people that have interest coming from SAP expertise and are not familiar with the product. A little bit of the customer success stories for Sentinel that were recently published, and then deep dive into the threat landscape of SAP system security for the security challenges with SAP systems. We'll talk about the solution and what we offer in order to deal with those challenges, and go over the implementation of the solution within Microsoft's own environment for Microsoft Digital, and end up with an elaborate demo of our recent capabilities and what the product can do for you hands-on. So Sentinel is a cloud-based SIEM, is a modern solution for the security operation within any organization. It integrates to data sources from your infrastructure, devices, users, and applications. Those data sources include first-party data sources, like Windows virtual machines, or Active Directory, but also includes integration to 300 different partners. So it integrates across to all the data sources that you have, virtually all the data sources that you have in your environment. And it allows you to connect, of course, to data sources outside of Azure, multi-cloud, multi-platform. And once the data is within the platform, you can detect threats by correlating the data and triaging the data into an alert, into an actionable incident that you can act upon, detecting a breach or a breach attempt in the environment, investigate the full scope of the attack, being able to visualize the data, and there's a handful of tools in Sentinel to investigate a security incident, respond automatically, respond manually. There's a lot of built-in automation in Sentinel, and of course also hunt for the threats, meaning being able to also be proactive and not just reactive to actual incidents. And that's more or less what the platform Sentinel offers. Sentinel value is to harness the scale of the cloud to reduce the management effort. It's a cloud-based platform. You don't need to scale it or to deal with its infrastructure or anything like that. It allows you to detect threats in a very efficient manner, decrease the false positives in your environment, expedite incident response, and we get 80% reduction in the labor related to investigation of threats and attacks, and get ahead of the attackers with a decreased time to deploy out of the box, ready to go solutions, such as the solution that we'll introduce today for SAP. There are a lot of customers using Microsoft Sentinel, and I really encourage you to read more about our customer success stories. We publish more and more all of the time, and those are just a couple of select names from the many customers who employ Sentinel as their main security tool to monitor the cross enterprise security. When it comes to SAP is a data custodian. It's essentially where the most critical data in the organization is being kept, from procurement orders, financial data, HR data, and whatnot. And cyber attackers, in the end, after hacking into virtual machines and our technical infrastructure, that's what they're after. They're after the data. And the data in the SAP applications is critical, and those applications are getting breached. As of course, you can find more items than that over the news, and when they get breached, that's actually where the real damage is being carried. When we look at the business critical data that is within SAP applications and understand that it must be protected, we face a couple of different challenges. First, like I started with, a breach into an SAP system can result in a catastrophe, a real catastrophe, disruption of operation of the company operation, manufacturing, and actually wire transfer money and still sensitive information from the organization, leading to loss of revenues and reputation impact. And on the other hand, we experience that many of the people and many of the users who are part of an organization that employs SAP for those purposes, they lack the security expertise or the awareness to actually deal with such an attack. And everybody can ask themselves, what kind of controls, what kind of handles do we have on SAP systems today? And it's also true that the security operation teams, the SOC teams, traditionally they have very little visibility into SAP because of all kinds of challenges in monitoring that. And most important, and this is why Sentinel is a very good tool for monitoring SAP, once an attacker is inside the system, is logged into your SAP, there's first so many ways to do things. SAP is a platform, it runs code. That code can be exploited in many, many ways, and there is very little that you can do to block the attack, but you can detect the attack if you have the right controls in place, the ones that we will show you today. Also important to know that even if you have controls, security controls, and start monitoring your SAP system, it makes sense and is imperative and vital to also cross-correlate the data from the SAP application, what happens within the application, together with the data that we get from the infrastructure that runs SAP, from Active Directory, from the networking, network devices, in order to gain a high fidelity of an attack. Because sometimes one signal that we see that is suspicious within an SAP system is not enough for you to actually afford the investigation, but together with the rest of the signals, you can triage the whole kill chain and gain also higher fidelity about the nature of the alert. And that's the gap that we see essentially within the security community. On one hand, we are geared towards monitoring technical things, virtual machines, containers, networks, clouds, and whatnot. And this is where the focus of most of the focus of the industry is. And on the other hand, what those systems, what those infrastructure solutions that we employ, all this technical infrastructure, what it does is eventually run business applications. That's where the data is, and what we actually need to protect is the data within those applications and the business processes there. Because of that gap between the great understanding and coverage of technical infrastructure versus the lack of visibility and understanding of the risks and the ability to monitor the business risk within those applications, that's in many cases what the attackers exploit and essentially manage to cause the damage and loss of data and so on. So the Microsoft Sentinel solution for SAP allows you to gain visibility to the business logic within SAP, to the application signals in SAP, transactions, operations that the users carry within the system, within changes that they make to the database. And of course, because Sentinel also covers the technical IT monitoring, that's where everything starts, it also includes all the different signals from the operating system and the infrastructure that runs SAP, and combine all those signals together with the features and built-in capabilities of Sentinel allows you to detect suspicious activities such as privilege escalation, sensitive transactions that are being carried on an SAP system, data exfiltration, and those capabilities, once you connect or integrate your SAP system into Sentinel, are also coming out of the box. So you can expedite the time it takes to actually start implementing and monitoring your SAP systems from the infrastructure level up to the applicative level, which is what is unique and special about this solution. And it's also possible to use the data that we gain from SAP system, that data that is that includes, virtually everything about what happens in the system, from transactions to users creation, privileges, and whatnot, and use this data to also build your own detections and your own logic around that valuable data. The solution is now generally available. It was made generally available in August 22, and we are offering a 6-month promotion on this offering. I'll explain more about the pricing of this offer, and the billing starts in February 23 only for the solution. That's the promotion. And of course, you can always use a workspace that is a free trial to test the solution even after that. So once the solution is deployed, then SAP becomes another data source, the SAP application layer, another data source in addition to the rest of the data sources that Sentinel collects, and then you can triage and eliminate threats, respond to threats within that are detected and are happening within the SAP system, or at least even understand that if you had a breach, that it had an impact on this so critical data, and the attackers managed to propagate into those systems, and having the ability to understand what they did and to essentially assess their blast radius and take mitigative steps. So let's talk a little bit about deployment. The solution, because SAP systems are very sensitive and they're usually residing in networks that are highly isolated, we've provided the flexibility to deploy the data connector that takes the data out of SAP and sends it to Sentinel anywhere. It is delivered as a Docker container. There are instructions how to install it, essentially a one-liner script that you need to run, and of course there are some preparations that need to be made on the SAP system. We need a user in order to connect to the SAP system using RFC and SOAP, using an open SAP APIs, and we can connect to an SAP system anywhere, on-prem, in AWS, on the SAP cloud, such as RISE. Any NetWeaver capable system is subject to security monitoring once you deploy the solution, and you have the flexibility to install the connector, multiple connectors, anywhere on the network in close proximity to your SAP servers, and then that connector sends the data to Sentinel through encrypted channel through the Azure APIs. We deploy, so like I said, you need a user in order to allow the connectivity to SAP, and you can also use SNC, which is Secure Network Connectivity, a certificate-based authentication, or a plain username password authentication for RFC. The credentials that are being used in the solution, they're kept in the Azure Key Vault. And we also provide, together with Sentinel, there's a logic app, an automation connector that allows you to also automatically respond within an SAP system. And Andrew will show you a demo of that along the other things that we'll show you during the demo. And a lot of out-of-the-box content that covers hundreds of different threats and different threat categories and kill chain related activities within an SAP system, from persistency, exfiltration, initial access, very good coverage of the attack matrix for an SAP system, which is increasingly growing. So we provide the ability to configure. The solution comes with out-of-the-box detections. You can also bring your own, but those detections are easy to configure. We provide simple configurations for them, so you don't have to edit KQL in order to get the solution not only deployed and starting to provide value, but also tailored specifically to your unique environment and needs. We use built-in normalization and functions that allow you to extract data very efficiently for an SAP system, and we'll show you that on the demo, how easy it is to extract this data. We enable out-of-the-box detection, anomalies, and of course provide the ability to investigate, leverage UBA insights within Sentinel and across SAP entities, and of course use all the built-in capabilities of Sentinel to investigate the events and triage them, correlate them, cross-correlate them together with other data sources. And like I said, there is also automatic response that is possible, including a response that triggers an action within the SAP system. Other than this unique solution, which runs everywhere, I want to remind you that there are many built-in controls that Microsoft provides and Azure provides that is important to place around an SAP system. And of course, some of those controls are available on-prem or in other places. It's important, of course, to in addition to monitor and detect threats and active attempts to breach or a breach, to employ the maximum level of security also on the infrastructure and on everything around the SAP application. And a lot of technology can be provided for that from Microsoft. So I want to talk a bit about the pricing for the solution. So the solution is a premium solution on top of the Sentinel pricing model, meaning that once you install, once you connect a system, an SAP system, to the solution, then starting February 2023, until that there is no specific billing for SAP, you will be charged $2 per system, per SAP system, per hour. System is not a virtual machine. One system can span across hundreds of virtual machines. System is an SAP SID, system ID. It's an SAP terminology, and that billing will only start on February 23. In addition, the data that get ingested to Sentinel is priced regularly according to the tiered pricing, and of course we can provide all the pricing details. They're all in the Azure pricing, in the Sentinel pricing page, and there's also an offer page for Sentinel, which includes information and relevant links. We'll give you that later on during the presentation. So that's important to know. So coming to this, I want to ask my good friend Aaron to join the discussion, and I would like to ask him a few questions about how Microsoft IT, how Microsoft Digital is leveraging the solution to protect our own environment. Aaron, are you here?
I'm here, Yoav. Good afternoon. How are you doing?
Doing very good. It's a pleasure to have you here, and thank you for joining.
My pleasure.
So Aaron, tell us a little bit about yourself, about your role in Microsoft, so the audience will know.
Sure, happy to. So my name is Aaron Hillard. I've been here at Microsoft for about 22 years. I currently manage the SAP security team. My team is responsible for the application security layer within the SAP footprint at Microsoft. So that spans our NetWeaver or ECC environment, if you will, as well as our S4 and SaaS solutions. So my team is responsible again for all user access, interfaces, and so forth.
That's great, and that's actually not an easy task to carry. There's a lot on your shoulders, and I wanted to ask you. I mean, you have that role, but what do we actually have when it comes to SAP? Do we have a lot of estate? I mean, how important that is?
Sure. Yeah, so SAP is a critical infrastructure solution or ERP solution here at Microsoft. It's the backbone basically for our financials, HR, payroll, supply chain, services, etc. So most of our company and organizations run on SAP in some format. And so we've got thousands, actually tens of thousands of users currently actively using the environment. Within that, we also have numerous interfaces to partner applications, first-party applications, and so forth that we use internally for running the business. So there's tens of thousands of users, very dynamic environment. We've got about 15 production systems, spanning different functions across SAP, as mentioned. And then we've got over 100 non-prod systems that we also have in place that we do our development and configuration and such. So very dynamic environment. And we're also on the S4 journey, as most companies are as well. So as mentioned a little earlier, we do have S4 footprint as well. And so that's all in scope for our monitoring and alerting capability needs.
And what keeps you up at night when you look at the SAP system? What do you think should keep our audience up when they're thinking about the risks? What is risky? What are the top risks or important things that people who own SAP security or an SAP system should worry for?
Sure. Well, that's a very broad question, obviously, and I could probably spend the remaining part of this hour on that topic alone and then some. So to be brief about it, what keeps me up at night is pretty common to pretty much anybody in this role, and that is all the threats, the variability threats, the new threats, and trying to stay on top of the emerging and dynamic threat, I'll just say security risks and vulnerabilities, right? So the threat actors are changing, the tools change. What they're going after, obviously, is your core data, as you mentioned earlier. So there's also the moving parts of the business and the modernization of the business, right? So you have all these moving parts. Your threat landscape is moving, your business models and business and the data is always evolving. So trying to maintain some level of visibility to ensure that we are basically, hopefully, preventing, right, at minimum detecting, but hopefully preventing these key risks within our environment, both from internal threats as well as external threats.
So before you, thank you. And before you had Sentinel, I mean, what was the challenges you had in monitoring for the risks in your SAP environment?
Sure. Yeah, great question. So for us, I think we're fairly similar to a lot of customers, SAP customers, and that is we have a range of tools, both that we built as well as third party, that provided bits and pieces of information or visibility to our environment, but not a consolidated, unified solution. So basically, we had point solutions for specific types of risks or threats, and then we also, like I said, had a third-party solution that also augmented our needs as well. So we had a lot of different elements for monitoring our environment, but it was not in a consolidated format.
Okay, so that's definitely not a desired state. And looking at today, you've implemented the Microsoft Sentinel solution for SAP. Can you tell us a little bit about the implementation and your impressions and whatever you want to share with the audience about that?
Sure. So going from I'll call it a very dichotomous or diverse set of solutions to a more unified state has been a game changer for us. So with Sentinel, as customer zeros, we like to call ourselves, because we're basically using the newest, latest, greatest features that the product group is generating and taking feedback from us on. We're basically able to build scenarios, you'll see in the demo shortly, that basically are core to us, our security function and the business, and having that greater visibility in one place. So we can see what's going on in the environment. We can build scenarios that are, I'll call it correlation based. Basically, we can look at what Dynamics is doing, what people are doing in Dynamics and SAP, and look at for really rich, potentially broader threats than we had ability to do previously. So effectively, what we've done with your help, the team's help, is to define, I think we're at 27 scenarios right now, moving to about 54 or so in the coming weeks, of high risk, let's say high impact scenarios in the environment. So this has helped us land, as I mentioned multiple times, but greater visibility for, I'll call it threats around elevated access, threats around execution of sensitive transaction codes or activities, and threats on the interface side, as well as the lower infrastructure level, like the Azure subscription itself, OS and database. So we have basically all the different tiers of threats and risk available to us now through these threat scenarios, as well as I've mentioned correlation, so now broadening it out as well. So that's what we're currently building and using, and then expanding on into the business space. So now we're looking at how we can leverage this capability to monitor for high-risk business transaction activities, how we can augment compliance and controls through better visibility and or alerting. So kind of giving you a bunch there, but hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it even answers more than that, and we also understand that there is a roadmap for the future, and I hope that we can also share more of what we do. I think that the work that we had with you essentially led to a lot of value in the product for the good of all our customers, and we learned a lot together during this journey. So I want to thank you very much for coming and sharing.
Sure, my pleasure.
Now, and now I want to also introduce another good friend of mine, Andrew Lomakin. Are you here, Andrew?
Yeah, hi, Yoav.
Hello. So it's great to have you here. And Andrew, we wanted to ask you to show us a nice, brilliant demo of the solution, what it can do, hands-on. So are you ready?
Sure, absolutely. Let me just quickly share my screen then. So a couple of things we are going to talk about. We are going to talk about how to deploy the solution very, very high level. We're going to talk about what data we are collecting and how Sentinel can use that data. So as was mentioned previously in the slides, the solution consists of two components. Now, one is the data collector agent, something that's installed in a Docker container, connects to SAP, extracts data from SAP, and then sends that data on to Log Analytics and to Sentinel. And the second component of the solution is the actual content within Sentinel that is deployed through Content Hub, and that's actually the page you can see on the screen right now. So if you navigate the Content Hub, you'll have the Microsoft SAP solution here. There's going to be a blue install button. In my case, it's already installed. You click that, and once you do install it, you get 53 analytic rules, a bunch of functions, a number of watch lists. What's the purpose of them? We are going to cover that as we go through the demo. But then the second component, the actual data collector agent, is something that requires a little bit more effort to install. It's not like a single button click right now. So we have some great documentation available on the docs site. It actually walks you through the deployment milestones, like what are the prerequisites, and I think this has already been asked in the questions. What are the prerequisites for deploying? What SAP versions are supported? What preparation work needs to be done within the SAP environment itself? How do you set up the data connector agent? Right, so this is the counterpart that sits in the Docker container and that actually collects the data. And then how you set up and how you configure the security solution so to make the most value out of it. So just a quick demonstration of the actual data connector. It's being set up on my machine. So what it does, it goes, as I said, to SAP on a regular basis. So it's not 100% real time, but for some logs, it is near real time. Like, for example, audit log, we are collecting every minute. Other logs, we are collecting a little bit less frequently, but we're extracting all that data and sending it to Log Analytics. Now, let's have a look at the Log Analytics part. This is my demo environment. Again, as was mentioned initially by Yoav, Sentinel can collect data from multiple sources, like your Azure Active Directory, on-prem Active Directory, firewall logs, Azure, you name it, we can gather logs from it. This particular demo environment is focused only on SAP. However, I'm going to later jump into a different demo environment and show you some more advanced capabilities. Now, first, let's have a look at what kind of data we are grabbing from my test SAP system. As you can see, we're gathering a bunch of tables here. So we're gathering stuff like ABAP audit log. We are gathering, where's the audit log? Oh, there we go. There's the ABAP audit log. There's the user master data. There's a bunch of different logs that we're gathering, and they allow us to then we then have the ability to dive into that data, analyze it, and identify any threats that are happening. And for example, you can see here, this is the audit log being gathered from my test SAP system. There's users logging on, RFC calls being done, etc., etc. So all of the SAP activity is extracted and sent to Sentinel for storage and analysis. Now, one important aspect here is that we are really extracting it from SAP and putting it to log analytics. It becomes immutable. It cannot be tampered with, so it can be used for forensics later on as well. So with that really massive amount of data that we are getting from SAP, and it can easily be dozens and hundreds of megabytes per day from a single SAP system. Again, a lot depends on the configuration of SAP, on what are the auditing settings, etc. What can we do with that data? And this is where the fun part begins. This is where we've got our analytic rules. Now, when you deploy the solution, you're not going to get any rules in place by default. Instead, you'll get a number of rule templates. So you'll get those 50 rule templates installed once you deploy the solution. And when you're ready to operationalize those rule templates, you'll be able to click on a button. Once this thing finishes loading, you'll be able to click on the button there, and that will get convert this template into an actual active rule. Demo gods seem to be not pleased with me today. So let's have actually a look at some of the rules that I've already converted from a template into an actual rule. You see here there are some high severity rules like execution of sensitive transactions, execution of sensitive ABAP programs. One of my favorites here, change in the sensitive privileged user. So all of these analytic rules, they utilize KQL, Kusto query language, behind the scenes to query that massive amount of data that we're gathering and extract relevant events and produce incidents from those events. But one thing of an interest here is what is a privileged user. Now, okay, if we are in Linux world, we know root's privileged. If we are in Windows, we know administrator is privileged. But SAP is so flexible and can be customized so heavily that defining who's privileged or not is quite the tricky business. So, okay, we've got SAP star, we've got DDIC users, those are well known. But how do we really tweak this and really define what's a privileged user? And for that, we have defined watch lists. And watch list is a way you can customize the behavior of your SAP solution. So here you can implicitly define your privileged users. You can say that these guys are highly privileged, or you can say like, hey, if a user has been given a particular role, that user will be considered privileged. And we define a sample list of roles here. Like if you've been granted a SAP BC basis admin, well, probably you are a privileged user, and system will consider you as such. Because we are gathering user master data, we are gathering USR01 and other tables, we have the ability to figure out, based on the data inside these watch lists, what is considered privileged. We also have other watch lists available, like SAP networks. You can define what networks your company uses, and if there's a logon of a user that's, let's say, a highly privileged user coming from an unknown, undefined network, maybe that's a good reason to raise an alarm. So all of that smart logic, all of those watch lists are actually used by sophisticated functions. Now, once you deploy the solution, you get a number of functions available to you as well. For example, we've got a function, SAP users get privileged, which, well, guess what it does? It goes through the watch lists, it goes through the data gathered from the SAP systems, identifies which users have been granted which roles, compares it with what's defined in the watch list, and spits out a list of those privileged users to you. Now, why am I talking about that so much? Well, because we started in the change in sensitive privileged user, we started with this privileged word, and if we actually look through the actual logic, through the query, you'll actually see that's what it does. It actually leverages that SAP users get privileged function to identify what's most important for you, what users you really want to keep under watchful eye. And if they do something, or if there's any changes happening to them, you'll be alerted. Now let's give this another try to load the rule templates. Let's see if they load up. In total, there's about there's 54 analytic rules in total, covering different aspects, starting from privileged activities, data exfiltration, security mechanisms bypass, SP nego, and so on and so forth. Technical difficulties apparently are preventing me from showing them. Oh no, there we go. Cool. So as you can see, there's a wide range of alerts. One sensitive user makes a change to another user. Testing, debugging. What else we've got? We can actually filter down by just SAP. Just by SAP templates, so spool takeover, document printing, debugging activities, brute force, several users logging on from the same IP or a same user logging on from multiple IP addresses. There's a bunch of different rules available out of the box, but now what's more important is that once you have the data, you can write your own analytic rules and tackle additional scenarios that you want to tackle. Now, we help you by providing these smart functions, and we help you by providing the watch list that you can use to further customize the behavior of the SAP solution. Now, as I said, this was a small demo environment, so we've looked at the logs, we've looked at the analytic rules, but I really want to show you that when you ingest SAP data into Sentinel, we can also correlate it with other data coming from other sources. And this is a different environment that has not one source of data as my little demo lab, but more. And you can see here we've got an incident, SAP client configuration change. So something happened and the SAP system was modified. When an incident is fired, you have entities in Sentinel, and this is everything that's associated with that given incident: who, when, how, on which system, from which IP address, and so on and so forth. If we go into that incident, actually, you'll see that client configuration change. There were a few user accounts involved. There was a SAP star, there was DDIC, there was Jeff L, 1337 Haxor. That's a strange account there. And also a few hosts have been impacted, and a few systems. So these SIDs were found to be impacted by this particular incident. Now, in Sentinel, you have the ability, once you have an incident in Sentinel, you can click investigate, and that's going to take you to a graph view. Now, it will graph view builds this connection between all the entities that are associated in one incident and builds connections to any other incident where these same entities appear. So we start with SAP client configuration change incident as our starting point, but then we have a user account, an entity, Jeff L. And you can click a button here and you can say show related incidents. And you can now see that Jeff L, that user account, was involved in other suspicious activity. Like, for example, there was activity originating by Jeff L from a password spray associated IP address. So, this information comes from completely different data source. That comes from Azure AD probably. We know that Jeff L has been accessing our systems from an infrequent country. And that's, again, that already goes over all of his activities. Now, his Office 365, his, I don't know, VPN access, we combine that data and we say, yeah, there's something suspicious happening with Jeff. Activity from a Tor IP address, ooh, that is now definitely not something that should be going on. And then again, what's happening here, we're associating an incident. So there's an incident by itself, that there's an activity from a Tor IP address, right? And we see that, hey, Jeff L is involved in that. And now suddenly we also see that Jeff L is involved in changing SAP system configuration. So what this allows us to build is the full kill chain from the moment perhaps a user gets a suspicious email, a user clicks on that email, a user downloads some malicious attachment, runs it, and then SAP system gets impacted somehow. All of that, if Sentinel is deployed across the estate, we can catch that by monitoring Office 365, by monitoring Microsoft Defender, by streaming the Defender data into Sentinel, and then by also streaming in SAP data. And that will build us a graph showing the attack timeline from the beginning till the moment an important system gets affected. So that's one of the really cool capabilities of Sentinel in general. Just wanted to showcase that on this particular example. Now, what else do you get as part of the solution once you deploy it? You also get 4 workbooks that allow you to visualize the data. So we've got the audit log, initial access and attempts to bypass SAP security mechanisms, persistence and data exfiltration, and suspicious privileged operations. So these workbooks are essentially a way to visualize the data. You get them out of the box, you deploy them, and then you will be able to see the amount of logons that happen within your SAP system, the amount of failed logons, all those fancy charts, something that you want to look over to see what was the data collection trend, etc. I'm not going to show you these 4 particular workbooks because there's one really eye candy that I'd love to show you. And this is something that we've been working on for the past couple of months. This is something that's currently is in the pipeline of being rolled out across the regions. And that's the updated SAP audit workbook. Now, what we're looking at here is a completely different environment. We're looking at a couple billion records here because we are gathering data from a large amount of SAP systems. So this data has been anonymized. So because we are showing it to the public community, just to show you a glimpse of what kind of visualizations you'd get. So these are the SAP systems that are covered by Sentinel for SAP. There's a bunch of them. And you can see what kind of load, what kind of activity they're getting. So this system is more busy, this system is less busy, and so on. If there's any spikes, you'll be able to identify them real quick. That system is getting stressed. You get the breakdown of what kind of logons are happening. Are these interactive logons? Are these logons through RFC? Successful logons, failed logons. Now, failed logons we then categorize into all failed logons versus anomalous logons, and this is something that we've been investing a lot recently. Essentially, you might have a script or you might have a job that has username and password hard-coded, password was changed, and since then that job constantly fails. So if we raise an alarm bell, if we raise an alert every time your script fails to run, yes, you'll probably fix that script, but that's not a security issue. We want to identify suspicious activity, not your script failing every day, but a user who always logs in successfully and then suddenly 5 times in a row he's had issues. And that is anomalous activity. So we have the ability to identify that anomalous activity. We have the ability to, again, the usernames have been anonymized here. You can see that some users generally fail to log on. For example, this user here, he generally fails to log on. However, in this specific case, 2 of the logons here, just before we started the demo and a little bit back in time, there were 2 suspicious logons. So probably these logons originated from somewhere else. And by the way, that SAP user account is associated with an Azure Active Directory user who is flagged as high risk for some reason. So we are collecting, combining that data, and this is the better together story now that SAP privileged user logon incident that was raised is associated with a particular user account. Now, this is another nice view of your your SAP landscape, and that shows you which of the systems are getting the biggest amount of failed logon attempts. So which of the systems are under fire or maybe have been misconfigured and need some attention. Now, logon failure trends, if there's a sudden spike of failed logons, what kind of failed logons these are, what method of logons was used, etc., etc. So a bunch of data visualizations. And there's another icon here about same account activities. It's the amount of events that are originated by a given user. So this user generally has just recently generated 2 high severity incidents and no medium severity incidents, kind of a time frame of users' activity, the amount of noise they cause in Sentinel. This is the risk score, so how frequently every system pops up in Sentinel notifications. So it's a great way to visualize the data. And then, as I said, this workbook is currently being baked. It will be rolling out live very, very shortly. I think it's already in progress. Now, just being mindful of the time, let's go over what we've already discussed. So we've discussed the amount of logs that we're ingesting, what we can do with those logs using functions, analytics, watch lists. We've looked at the ability to visualize the data. We also have the ability to monitor the health of the agent. So the agent sits there in a Docker container, and you don't know if it's working or not. Well, you have this data connectors pane here, which will open up. You look for SAP, and over here you'll see whether the connector is healthy, whether the connector has been sending in any data. So how much data is being sent from it? Is it is it healthy, has been sending data? And these 3, for example, have not been sending data for the last 2 hours. It gets you an idea of the health of this data collection process. But now, one other scenario I'd really like to tackle. Now, as we know, Sentinel is usually manned by our SOC team, so our security specialists that may not be necessarily too familiar with SAP. And for example, if we have an incident that a sensitive privileged user has logged on, right, within SAP, if you're a SOC administrator, what do you do about it? You don't know how to access SAP. You don't know how to open up SAP GUI and what to do in it either, and you may not even have the rights. So what you do, of course, you pick up the phone and you dial your basis admin and ask them, hey, what's going on? Now, that is time lost. So how can we make this process quicker and more efficient? And I'm going to show you a thought, an idea of what can be implemented. It doesn't come out of the box, but it's still available for you to implement. And we have really, really good blog posts about how to make it work. Imagine you're getting a Teams message, just like this one. Hey, a sensitive privileged user has logged on into your SAP system. This is the system's name. This is the username. But bear in mind, this is not just a regular email or a Teams message. It's an adaptive card that actually asks you, what do you want to do about it? Do we want to ignore this, or we want to block that user? What is the next action? And as a SOC analyst, again, I don't know how to access SAP, but I can look up the system in our investigation view, see if there's any other suspicious activity happening, and make a decision of, is this activity expected or not? And if it's not expected, I just click a button, block user in SAP. Now, what happens behind the scenes is really, really cool, because we have a logic app, and a logic app is our way to do automation in Sentinel. And a logic app will be triggered when an incident is fired. Now, in our particular case, privileged user has logged on, we trigger this particular logic app. We get the incident data, we post an adaptive card and wait for a response, and that's the cool part. So we're not just sending out an email and forgetting about it, but we're actually waiting for the security analyst's response. And if the analyst response is, yeah, block the user in SAP, this is the best part. We are actually going back to SAP and we're calling out a method to lock that target user. So we're not just getting data from SAP, but we also have the mechanism, and this is not part of the solution. This is a separate connector that you install. There's a whole procedure around it. It's not too complicated, but just as a vision. You click a button and that user gets locked in SAP, and that's your incident solved right there. Of course, if the incident, if this was a false positive and it was your basis admin logging in, you click ignore, and then we close the incident and say, okay, that's false positive, don't worry about it. But this actual ability of for not only get extensive data, match it with other data from other sources in Sentinel, but also go back to the affected system and remediate it is something that is super cool in Sentinel. And that's what I wanted to talk about in this demo. Yoav, back to you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. That was, I believe, a great demo. So before we conclude, what I would like to do is ask the audience for. So I need to kind of arrange. So we had the demo, and I want to thank you, Andrew, for that. I hope that the audience managed to capture the essence of our capabilities, and of course, there is more demos and videos that can be found and information on our blogs. I want to ask the audience to take an action today to start trying Sentinel, to learn more about the SAP offering in Sentinel by going to the SAP offer page and to the links and valuable resources provided there, including our documentation. Of course, you can also learn more about the pricing of Sentinel and the solution. And in addition, I would like to call out and suggest that you will also join our private community. The private community gives you early access to our software, to our private previews, and it's a great source of influence on the product direction, where you get to actually be part of development of the next features, both for SAP and for other solutions and for Sentinel platform overall. Other than that, do we have time for one or two questions?
Yeah, we do. We do have a couple. The team was great in answering some questions, but there's a few we could reiterate. The first one is, how many SAP systems / clients can be connected to Sentinel? Is there any limitation?
So there isn't any limitation that we ever recorded. We do provide some guidelines about the size of the virtual machine that runs the collector agent that connects to SAP. And of course, it's influenced by the amount of data and the scale of the system. Usually it's a typical machine. We can look at our docs and see exactly the size. Sentinel is a cloud service. It's completely elastic, and you can push data to it, and doesn't matter from how many systems you do it.
Great, thank you. Our next question, is there any way to estimate the amount of data which will be ingested to Sentinel based on some parameters related to SAP systems?
Yes, I think that's a very good question. So SAP systems vary. There are many, many different modules in SAP. Some of them we saw during the demo, like CRM or ERP or finance or whatnot. And that influences a lot on the actual generation of data in the system. So the best way to do it is, of course, to connect a system, copy of a system, even just for a short while, and then extrapolate. Another way to do that, a good, let's say, kind of a ballpark figure for starting, is 4 megabytes per user per day to assess the amount of data. But again, this can vary. We're not committing on this number in any way, but it's a good way to kind of get a hang of what's expected. The number of users is one of the things that impacts it, but also how the system was configured and what kind of use cases are applied to it, and also what kind of logs that you enabled and at what granularity.
Great, thank you. And the last question is there such a thing as a secure score for SAP systems?
So that's a good question. So at this moment, we provide a lot of insights about scoring from Active Directory, MDC, and provide entity insights into SAP in our Entity Insights blade in Sentinel. But there's no specific score for an SAP system at the moment, and hopefully we'll have such in the future.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank you, Yoav, Andrew, and Aaron for being our guests today and for an excellent presentation. And thank you to the rest of the team who helped answer questions. At the same time, I would like to remind the listeners that the best way to ensure you don't miss any future webinars or major announcements is to visit our landing page at aka.ms/securitycommunity. And while there, you'll find easy ways to navigate and find the resources and learning content relevant to our security products and their communities. A good start would be browsing our bite-sized product videos, ninja trainings, recordings of past webinars, GitHub communities, and more. We'd love to hear your feedback on how we can improve these webinars. Please take a minute submitting your webinar feedback at aka.ms/security webinar feedback. Thank you and see you next time. Goodbye.